Hey guys, tonight we begin beneath a sky so big it almost swallows sound. You're lying on ochre earth, your head cradled by a rolled up bark pillow, and above you, the stars aren't twinkling, they're glaring, clear, steady, and infinite. But don't be fooled by the postcard romance of the Australian outback at night, because once the sun dips behind the eucalyptus trees, the temperature drops like a startled wallaby. It's cold enough that your breath ghosts into the air and the soil beneath your back starts to feel like chilled iron, and that's a problem. Because, see, you didn't bring a sleeping bag or even a coat. You're sleeping like the ancestors did before tents, before fleece-lined thermals, before those adorable little microwavable hand warmers shaped like cats. You've got the open sky, a fire dwindling to coals, and maybe, if you're lucky, a kangaroo pelt draped across your legs. Maybe. Otherwise, you're going to get very well acquainted with the bite of desert air. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how many of us are dozing off from different corners of the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir slightly and look around. The landscape stretches endlessly, a canvas of quiet hills, scrub trees, and baked red soil that's turning purple under the moonlight. There's a rustle in the grass, maybe a nocturnal sugar glider, maybe just the wind. You're not too concerned. What really grabs your attention is the cold. This is Central Australia, the outback, a place more known for blistering sun than bone-deep chill. But here you are shivering. Indigenous Australians knew this feeling well. For tens of thousands of years, Aboriginal peoples have lived in every kind of climate on this vast continent, coastal, tropical, alpine, arid, and each environment demanded its own warmth strategies. There were no chimneys or chiming clocks here, no down jackets or thermal socks. Warmth had to come from knowledge from the land and from each other. Mainstream archaeologists agree that one of the longest continuous cultures on Earth evolved systems of survival that were both pragmatic and poetic. You didn't just get warm, you belonged to warmth. Fires weren't merely tools, they were companions. Cloaks weren't only for the body, they were for the story. But here's your first reality check. Even with all that knowledge, you still probably wouldn't survive the night. Because it wasn't just about having tools, it was about knowing how to use them. For instance, did you know that some Aboriginal groups only built fires in hollows, digging shallow pits to keep the flames low and insulated from the wind? Not dramatic bonfires, just steady glows, like quiet hearts beating into the soil. That method conserved wood, kept heat closer to the ground, and avoided sending smoke signals to every predator or rival nearby. And that's where you are now, scooting slightly closer to the earth, hoping the fire's final embers still have something to give. Your eyes sting a little from the smoke. Your nose twitches as the air carries hints of burnt gum leaf and ash. And your hands, they're tucked tight under your arms, fingers curled in like sleepy caterpillars. Historians still argue whether the cold was treated as a seasonal annoyance or a spiritual test. There's not enough documentation to say definitively, but the stories, those oral histories passed from grandmother to grandchild, suggest that winter wasn't just endured, it was navigated. In some regions, winter nights were times of story sharing, of ritual, of skin-to-skin sleep that wasn't merely comfort, it was survival. Cold required closeness. No one warmed up alone. And while the daytime desert might fry an egg on your head, the nighttime desert could chill your teeth. That contrast, so intense, it feels unreal, is what shaped entire traditions. You wrap yourself tighter in your imagined kangaroo cloak, already wondering how people coped in colder, windier, wetter regions than this one. But don't worry, you'll get there. First, rest your head again on that bark pillow, feel the earth's ancient breath beneath you, and let the chill remind you this land has always demanded respect, and those who learned to sleep through its coldest nights, they earned it. You're not quite sure when you dozed off, but you wake with a twitch. The fire is burned lower, the stars have shifted, and your nose is now as cold as a forgotten yam. Your breath comes out in little puffs, barely visible in the dark. You pull the kangaroo skin cloak closer, if you even had one, which, let's be honest, you probably didn't stitch yourself earlier. But the people who lived here before you, they did, and they were very good at it. Kangaroo pelts were the go-to winter wear for many Aboriginal groups, especially in southern and inland regions where frost wasn't just possible, it was routine. These weren't crude fur rags tossed over a shoulder. No, these cloaks were engineering marvels stitched together with sinew, often from kangaroo tail tendons and sometimes over a dozen pelts thick. You're basically picturing a luxury duvet, only it can be worn like a toga, folded like origami, and used to cradle babies or shield from wind. The best part, the fur faced inward. That's right, cozy against the skin. The outer leather was often smoked or rubbed with ash to repel rain, keep insects away, and even mask scent when hunting. Some cloaks bore subtle decorations, incised marks that acted as maps or family lineage markers. In that sense, they were both garment and genealogy. Your blanket had a story, and they weren't just wrapped willy-nilly. There was a technique. Think of it as the weighted blanket before weighted blankets were a TikTok trend. You'd wrap one corner under your feet, draw the opposite edge across your chest, and secure it with your own body weight. No buttons, no toggles, no zippers, just design refined over thousands of cold nights. Historians still argue whether cloaks were worn all day or saved for sleep, since some oral accounts suggest they were too precious to waste on sunshine. Others argue that a well-used cloak was never taken off day or night, season or ceremony. And given how labor-intensive they were to make, you can't really blame them. Making one could take weeks, especially if the pelts weren't exactly cooperative. You had to scrape, stretch, smoke, soften, and even then there was always a kangaroo somewhere giving you a judgmental side eye. But if you had one and you knew how to use it, the cold wasn't your enemy. It was a challenge you'd already prepared for. You shuffle now in your mind, imagining how it felt to sleep in a wind-exposed plain with nothing but a pelt around you and embers near your toes. No tent walls to flap, no sleeping pads to cushion. Just dirt body heat and a cloak that your aunt probably sewed for you while telling stories about the stars. Some groups preferred possum skin cloaks, especially in what is now Victoria and parts of New South Wales. Possum fur was finer, more insulating, and, according to some oral histories, lighter on the shoulders. But kangaroo pelts held the crown for sheer durability. Their leather could withstand wet grass ash and even minor rainfalls. They were, as we'd say today, built different, and if your cloak started to wear thin, you didn't toss it. You repaired it. Some surviving examples preserved in museums today show dozens of patches and re-sewn sinew lines. Every thread told a story of survival. Every scrape a reminder of a night spent with your back against the wind and your belly toward the coals. One fringe theory, unconfirmed, but fascinating, suggests that some cloaks were shared between families, passed down like heirlooms, and slept in communally. Imagine that 3 generations under one cloak huddled like spoons in a drawer, listening to a grandmother whisper how the stars used to be different. You shift again mentally, tugging your imagined cloak a little higher, and the wind brushes your cheek with something that almost feels like memory. The land remembers warmth, even if you don't. The cloak you're imagining may never have been yours, but someone, somewhere, once, wore it like a second skin. They laughed in it, slept in it, dreamed of summer in it. And now as the fire crackles low, you begin to understand that keeping warm here wasn't just about survival. It was about connection to the land, to each other, to the past. So you close your eyes again. Let the cold nudge you closer to the imagined comfort of fur and ash, of stitched sinew and shared stories. It's only going to get colder, but luckily the ancestors were ready for that too. A faint pop from the fire startles you, just a twig giving up its final spark, but in the stillness it sounds like a gunshot. You shift in place again, stiff from the cold and the weight of your imagined cloak. This time you're not pulling fur closer, you're reaching toward the embers. Because long before hot water bottles or insulated blankets, warmth had another name: fire sticks. In many Aboriginal cultures, particularly in the arid and semi-arid regions, people slept with fire, not beside it with it. It was common to place smoldering fire sticks or live coals near one's body throughout the night, especially along the spine or at the feet. You'd wrap these embers in bark or nestle them in carved out hollows in the ground, creating a kind of ancient heating pad, one that didn't need a plug or a safety manual, though, yes, it occasionally set someone's hair alight. Now, before you panic about being set ablaze in your sleep, know this: the fire sticks weren't roaring flames. They were carefully managed coals, glowing like sleepy eyes, slow burning and respectful. People knew how to cradle fire without letting it bite. A mistake could be fatal, sure, but generations of practice made this as routine as fluffing a pillow. And here's where it gets delightfully strange. Some elders, according to oral histories, would even sleep on top of warm ashes. They'd rake out a patch of glowing coals, layer it with sand, and then lie right down on top of it. Congratulations, you've just discovered the prehistoric heated mattress. The fringe tidbit here: certain regional groups developed small portable ember containers, usually hollowed out stone or wood, that could be carried while traveling. Think of it like an Aboriginal thermos, but instead of coffee, it held survival. These ember carriers were cradled during travel and tucked close to the body at night. In colder climates or wind-exposed camps, it was the difference between waking up stiff and not waking up at all. You sit back now in your imagination, feeling the faint heat radiating from a dug-in ember pocket by your hip. You don't dare touch it. It's glowing orange in the dark, pulsing like a heartbeat. But its warmth reaches you all the same. No cords, no batteries, just fire dirt and know-how. Historians still argue whether these night fires served ceremonial purposes or were purely practical. In some cultures, fire was more than warmth. It was ancestral, alive, and aware. Letting it go out wasn't just cold, it was disrespect. Some Dreamtime stories warn of what happens when fire is mistreated: spirits lose their way, or the land forgets your footprints. So, Keeping fire alive all night had meaning beyond comfort. It kept the world in balance. You imagine now how the night would unfold. Someone gently wakes up every few hours to check the coals, to add bark or a dry stick to whisper to the flames. Maybe a grandmother, maybe a teenage cousin with smoke-stung eyes and sleepy legs. It's a rotating job, but it matters. And even while you're half asleep wrapped in your kangaroo pelt, you might extend one hand to the nearest fire stick just to feel its pulse. Not hot, just alive. A reminder that in the cold you are not alone. Fire is with you. Fire watches. Fire remembers. You roll slightly in your imaginary bed pit, stretching your legs toward the edge of the coals. The warmth there is subtle now but constant. You don't fear the night anymore. The cold has not gone, but it has a rival, so you let your eyes close again. And this time, it's the fire stick beside you that hums the lullaby. You're just beginning to slip into that odd, floaty kind of half-sleep, somewhere between dreaming and feeling your toes, when you notice something warm and heavy press against your legs. It shifts, snuffles, then settles with a sigh. You don't open your eyes. You don't need to. That's a dog. Or maybe dogs plural. Because in some Aboriginal communities, especially those in the cooler highlands and interior regions, keeping warm at night meant sleeping with dogs. Not as a cozy option, but as a survival technique. There's even a phrase you may have heard, a 3-dog night. Yes, that's where the term comes from. Cold enough to require 3 dogs curled around you just to make it until morning. These weren't domesticated pets with leashes and chew toys. They were camp dogs. Dingoes often semi-wild, roaming by day and curling up beside humans by night. The relationship was symbiotic. People fed them scraps. Dogs offered body heat and protection. And if you've ever tried to sleep outside in a desert winter, you'll understand that a warm breathing, fur-covered heater with a pulse is a blessing from the stars. You imagine now your body curved into a C1 dog tucked at your belly, another by your knees, and a third stretched along your back like a living scarf. You'd smell dust and dingo breath, sure, but you'd also feel wrapped in warmth and safety. These animals were family, not bred in kennels or trained to sit for treats, but known by name, remembered in stories painted on cave walls. Historians still argue whether the dingo was ever fully domesticated. Some say no, it remained too wild, too solitary. Others point to generations of camp living and mutual dependency as evidence of a deeper connection. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, wagging its tail and refusing to be defined. There's a fringe theory, too. Some elders say certain dogs would choose you. They'd sleep beside the sick, the elderly, or grieving children drawn to emotional need as much as temperature. No one trained them to do this. They simply knew. And in the stillness of a desert night, when even the stars feel far away, that kind of knowing is warmth, all its own. You shift your legs, picturing the furry pressure of a dingo's body. It grunts softly, nuzzles closer. Not real, of course, but real enough for this moment. And don't forget your cloak is still on. You're now a sandwich pelt on top dogs, below fire embers to one side. Even the cold starts to retreat. You begin to feel like you're winning, but this wasn't just an individual affair. Some communities slept communally, entire families bundled together with cloaks and animals, a tangle of limbs, breath and heartbeat. Babies nestled between mothers and aunties, elders at the fire's edge, half watching the coals, half listening to the stories being whispered between sleep and dawn. Warmth here wasn't just physical, it was relational. It meant you were held by dogs, by kin, by fire, by tradition. You weren't surviving alone in the dark. You were surviving with. So now, as you lie back and imagine one last canine head resting across your ankles, remember this: some of the oldest forms of warmth had legs, teeth, and a tail. They didn't need electricity or fleece, just loyalty, just presence. You sigh. The dogs sigh. Somewhere nearby, a stick cracks in the fire. The night continues. You wake again just slightly as a strange warmth climbs up from beneath you, not from dogs this time, or from coals tucked near your ribs, but from the ground itself. A soft rising heat, almost like lying on a giant loaf of fresh bread. You shift your elbow and suddenly realize you're sleeping over an earth oven. That's right. In many Aboriginal communities, cooking and heating weren't separate activities. If you're going to dig a pit line, it with stones, build a fire, and bury something in it too. Slow roast overnight. Why not sleep on it too? Welcome to the world of thermal pragmatism. Earth ovens, sometimes called coop murries or umu, depending on the region, were mostly for cooking meats, roots, and tubers. But once the fire had done its job and the stones were radiating deep, sustained warmth, the pits themselves became makeshift heaters. After the meal was done, or while it still simmered, people would rest nearby or even over top of the covered ovens, lying on woven mats or cloaks, layered between their bodies and the smoldering earth. You try this in your mind now. Imagine folding a woven mat over warm soil, then curling up on top. The ground radiates heat through the fabric slowly, without sudden bursts or smoke. No flames lick at your toes, no sparks threaten your cloak. It's a slow hug from the land, a subterranean embrace. One mainstream archaeological finding even suggests some of these oven pits were used for group gatherings where warmth, cooking, and storytelling happened simultaneously. A kind of prehistoric living room glowing from beneath. But here's the quirky tidbit. In certain regions, the leftover ashes from these ovens weren't just left to cool, they were scooped up and rubbed on exposed skin as insulation. Think of it as the original spa treatment meets emergency blanket. Ash mixed with grease or fat created a mildly adhesive, insulating paste that helped hold in warmth when temperatures dropped. And if you're making a face right now, remember, it's not that different from clay masks or charcoal salves you pay way too much for at boutique skincare shops. Only this version smelled more like smoked yam and had the added benefit of repelling insects. Historians still argue whether earth oven heat was intentionally repurposed for sleep, or if it was simply a byproduct that people wisely took advantage of. The line between deliberate innovation and opportunistic comfort can be blurry, especially when both involve warm dirt and full bellies. You can almost hear it now, the slow hiss of buried leaves over hot stones, the creak of a wooden digging stick, someone quietly pulling meat from the embers. Maybe they hand you a small cooked tuber wrapped in bark, its scent rich and nutty. Maybe you eat it in 2 bites. And then belly warm, you settle onto the oven's remains and let the heat work upward into your bones. The night isn't silent, it never is out here. There's a faint clicking of night insects, the wind brushing past spinifex grass, a distant cough from someone else sleeping by the coals. But the warmth from below makes the cold feel far away. The land is not just under you, it's cradling you. feeding you, yes, but also holding you. And just as you begin to drift off again, your fingertips brushing the edge of warm soil, a soft, silly thought passes through your mind, prehistoric underfloor heating. You smirk in the dark. Humans are always clever when we're cold. You're dreaming now, sort of. Not quite asleep, not quite awake. You can feel the warmth under you and the soft pelt over your shoulders, but there's a new element now, a faint rustling at your back, like the hush of leaves brushing against bark. You open one eye in your imagination and realize you're tucked inside a makeshift shelter, a simple, clever construction designed to block the wind and hold in heat, wattle and daub windbreaks. They might not sound glamorous, but they're one of the unsung heroes of nighttime survival. Aboriginal groups across Australia built these small, semi-permanent structures using local materials, flexible branches, the wattle woven together into a frame, then plastered with mud, grass, or even dung the daub to create a solid surface that stood firm against the elements. Some were large enough for a family to huddle inside, others just curved walls meant to shield your back while you slept under the open sky. You picture one now, a low crescent wall behind you blocking the cold wind. In front of you, a fire glows in its final stage, and above you, nothing but stars and the occasional drifting cloud. It's a minimalist setup, but it works. No need for four walls and a roof, just a strategic curve to catch the heat and keep it near your skin. Historians still argue how often these windbreaks were rebuilt versus reused, and whether certain materials like termite mound clay were preferred for their insulating properties. Archaeological traces are hard to find when your building materials are biodegradable after all. But in oral history, they're a constant presence. Protection from wind didn't require architecture. It required wisdom. The fringe tidbit. In some areas, families would create semi-buried windbreaks, shallow pits dug into the ground lined with branches and softened with leaves, then covered on one side by a woven wall. You'd climb in like a bird in a nest and let the walls do the rest. They weren't bunkers, they were heat traps. And if the fire was nearby, the effect was delightfully snug. You're adjusting in your imagined windbreak, now the mud wall at your back, still warm from the earlier sun. It doesn't creak, it doesn't whistle, it just exists quietly doing its job, the way things do when they're made from the land that needs them. You notice how the wind bends around you now, how it wants to push but fails. You're in a pocket of stillness. And if you were to reach out just a few inches, you'd feel the temperature difference on your fingertips. Cold air out there, cozy air in here. These windbreaks weren't only practical, they were social. Elders sat beside them cooking or sorting tools while the kids played in the dirt. They provided enough privacy for rituals or quiet conversations, but remained open enough for community, like a porch that hugs your shoulders. And when the rains came, some daub walls were mixed with waterproofing agents. Sap ash even crushed bark. Others simply accepted the wet and rebuilt after. The relationship with shelter was never permanent. It was seasonal, mobile fluid. Just like everything else in these landscapes, you smile to yourself now, curled deeper into your mental shelter. It's amazing what a few sticks and some mud can do. It's humbling too, because while you once thought of shelter as something with nails and shingles and insulation foam, now you're seeing it for what it can also be. Intention. Placement. Just enough. You breathe deeply. The wind tries again, sighs past the outer curve of your wall, and moves on. At some point in the night, you notice the smoke. Not a lot, just enough to curl softly into your nostrils, earthy and oddly soothing. It doesn't sting your eyes, it doesn't make you cough. It just hangs there, suspended like a thin blanket between the stars and your breath. This isn't an accident. In fact, it's intentional, because for many Aboriginal groups, sleeping near smoke wasn't a nuisance, it was a necessity. You shift a little closer to the fire, which now smolders more than it blazes, the flame tamed into a low, loyal companion. The smoke rises gently, wafting around your shelter, mingling with the fur of your cloak and clinging to your skin like invisible armor. Why? Because smoke in this world does more than warm. It protects. From what insects, for starters? The Australian outback is not short on things that buzz, bite, and crawl. Mosquitoes, sandflies, and midges all hate smoke, and you ideally do not. A smoky campfire becomes your shield, its scent masking your sweat, its particles clogging the sensory radar of pests. It's bush science passed down through generations. But the benefits go beyond insect defense. In cooler regions, smoke also acted as a kind of passive insulation. It lingered low in sleeping spaces, especially in small shelters or windbreaks, helping to trap warmth. A smoky hut might not sound like five-star comfort, but when it's 3 degrees outside and there's frost clinging to the spinifex grass, you'll take what you can get. And here's the quirky twist. Some groups even preferred smoky air at night, believing it helped cleanse the spirit or keep away bad dreams. In some traditions, smoke had ceremonial and medicinal significance. It wasn't just fire's byproduct. It was a substance in its own right. You didn't breathe it mindlessly. You breathed it respectfully. Historians still argue whether this habitual exposure to smoke had long-term health effects. Some researchers suggest lung issues were surprisingly rare, while others suspect the low rates of respiratory illness might have had more to do with lifestyle, less sugar, more walking, fewer TikToks than the air quality. But the truth remains hazy, much like the air itself. You rub your arms slowly, as if to warm them, and in your mind you smear a little ash from the fire across your forearm, not because it's dirty, but because it's useful. Some Aboriginal people rubbed ash on their skin as part of ritual, but also to protect from the cold. It created a thin, gritty barrier between skin and chill, especially when mixed with animal fat. Think of it as the original balm, smoky, gritty, and surprisingly effective. There's something deeply grounding about it all. The warmth of fire, the scent of smoke, the hush of a night where even the air feels older than you are. You start to notice how the smoke doesn't rise sharply like a chimney plume. It drifts swirling like a lazy river through the air, curling over your feet, tracing your breath. And then you remember the phrase passed down in one oral tradition: the smoke remembers your body. You're not entirely sure what that means, but here, wrapped in fur firelight, dancing against mud walls and smoke, curling through the shelter like a sleepy snake, you start to believe it. So you lie still, let the smoke wrap you up. It won't hurt you. It's here to keep you warm, keep you safe, and keep the night from creeping in too close. You're warm now, not just from fire or fur, but from something strange and slightly unexpected, your own skin. It doesn't feel as dry. It doesn't sting from the wind. It's supple, almost slick, like it's been oiled. And that's exactly the point. Because tonight, you've unknowingly embraced one of the oldest and glossiest survival techniques, rubbing fat on your skin. It may sound off-putting to modern ears, but in many Aboriginal communities, especially in colder regions or during the winter season, people coated their bodies with animal fat, often from emu kangaroo or even goanna, not to shine like a disco ball, but to preserve warmth, insulate the body, and protect against wind and water. You lift your hand in your mind and imagine it slick with fat and streaked with the fine gray dust of cooled ash. The effect isn't just physical, it's sensory. The cold no longer bites the same way. You feel armored, like the weather has to work a little harder to find its way to your bones. This combination fat and ash created a kind of bushman's balm. Ash thickened the fat and acted as a natural antiseptic. It also dulled the scent, repelling insects and masking the human smell from prey. It was warmth and camouflage in one smear. And yes, before you ask, it got on everything. But when the nights dipped below freezing, no one cared about sticky blankets. There's even a fringe tidbit about this mixture. Some groups believed certain ashes, especially from specific medicinal plants, had spiritual properties. They'd choose their wood carefully, not just for how it burned, but for how it lived on in the ashes. The fat was a carrier. The ash was the message. Historians still argue whether this practice was daily routine or ceremonial. In some regions, it seems to have been both everyday survival with layered meaning, kind of like sunscreen that also tells a myth. You don't just wear it, you become part of it. And here's a fun twist. You're probably familiar with the idea of smoke cleansing or oil anointing from other cultures. Aboriginal fat and ash rubs sit at the intersection of both. They protected, yes, but they also transformed. Children were rubbed with fat as they grew, both to keep them warm and to symbolize care. Warriors greased their limbs before ceremonies. Even tools and cloaks were occasionally oiled to soften and protect them. You reach now toward the imagined pouch near your feet. Maybe it's made of bark or a kangaroo bladder, and pull out a scoop of semi-solid fat mixed with pale ash. You smear it over your arms, chest, neck. It smells faintly like smoked meat and campfire. It feels like armor, and suddenly the night no longer feels quite so dangerous. The wind loses its sharp edge. You understand now how this blend wasn't just about comfort. It was about belonging to the land, moving through it without being undone by it. Because out here, the earth doesn't care if you're cold, but the ancestors did, and they left you a recipe. You feel it now, the texture against your skin, not just the faint sheen of ash and fat, but something softer, warmer, layered. As you shift slightly, it slides across your shoulder, rustling faintly like dry leaves. You open your mind's eye and see what you're wrapped in, a possum skin cloak. And this one is special. In parts of southeastern Australia, especially among the Yorta Yorta Gunditjmara and Wurundjeri people's cloaks made from possum pelts weren't just insulation, they were heirlooms, maps, blankets, bedding memory scrolls, and even burial shrouds. Each cloak could take dozens of pelts to construct, and every square was sewn with sinew and softened by hand. No two were alike. This isn't just a jacket you toss over your shoulders, this is your story. You examine it now with your fingertips. The outside is tanned leather, sturdy and protective, but the inside is soft, furred, plush, with warmth. But it's what's on the leather that draws your attention. Symbols, carvings, etched lines. These were not decorative flourishes, they were maps of country, markers of kinship, or scenes from daily life. One square might show a river bend where your grandfather fished. Another might depict the emu your aunt once chased barefoot through the reeds. Each mark had meaning, and every meaning had a place. You pull the cloak tighter now, folding it across your chest, the way a child might with a favorite quilt. It doesn't just protect from cold, it connects you to those who walked before you. Historians still argue whether these designs were strictly geographic, totemic, or autobiographical. Some cloaks show clear maps of country, complete with symbolic rivers and hunting grounds. Others seem more abstract, like a diary written in texture. But all of them share one certainty: they held stories close to the skin. You shift again, imagining how heavy the cloak would be, not burdensome but present, a physical reminder of your place in the world. The fur on the inside traps warmth. The etched designs outside trap memory. And here's the quirky bit: some possum skin cloaks were so highly valued that in the 19th century, European settlers offered money or goods to trade for them. Most offers were declined. To give away your cloak was to give away part of yourself. In modern times, these cloaks are being made again. Revived by indigenous artists, educators, and elders, the craft has returned not just as art, but as resistance, as reclamation, as comfort. Children now wear them at naming ceremonies and graduations. Elders pass them on. Warmth once stolen is being stitched back together. You lie back now in your imagined cloak, tracing the invisible lines across your chest. Each line a ridge of raised sinew, each curve an echo. You know somehow that this isn't just a blanket. It's a conversation. You're covered not just in fur, but in meaning. And as the wind picks up again, tugging gently at the corners of your shelter, the cloak holds steady. You've never been warmer or more known. The night stretches on, calm and immense, but you're not worried. You're tucked in beneath fur grease and ash, with a faint glow of fire nearby, and the ghost of stories wrapped around you. Still, something nags gently at the back of your mind. Not the cold this time, but the placement of it all. Why is your camp here not over that ridge, not down by the water? You roll slightly and look around with your imagination. Flat terrain, windbreak curving to the east, fire nestled in a shallow depression. You're sleeping in a microclimate of warmth. And that's no coincidence. Aboriginal Australians didn't just sleep wherever. They picked their spots with the precision of survivalists and the intimacy of poets. Campsites were often selected for thermal efficiency, and not just in the sense of staying close to the fire. This went deeper. The orientation of the site, the type of vegetation nearby, the slope of the land, and the exposure to wind all mattered. Warmth wasn't hunted, it was arranged. Mainstream archaeological studies have shown that many seasonal camps were built in places where rocks retained daytime heat, or where the surrounding terrain shielded from dominant winter winds. One rock outcrop could make the difference between a frigid night and a bearable one. You imagine yourself now lying in a slight bowl of land where the fire's heat sinks instead of drifting away. You notice how the trees on the southern edge block the breeze while the eastern curve opens up to morning sun. Someone, probably many someones, chose this exact spot for its ability to cradle warmth, not just for the night, but for generations. Historians still argue how much of this knowledge was consciously articulated versus passed down through habit and example. Did people know the thermodynamics of granite? Probably not in those words, but they knew. The same way you know which side of the bed is cozier, or how certain corners of your house are naturally colder than others. And here's a fringe tidbit that will make your inner thermostat raise an eyebrow. In some areas, camps were placed near termite mounds, not because they were edible, though they are, but because the earth around them retained warmth longer due to the disturbed aerated soil. Sleeping near one might mean an extra few degrees of comfort as the night deepened. The entire campsite functioned like an open-air machine fire, in one part shelter, in another dogs, curled in natural windbreaks, and everyone positioned to both share and protect warmth. It wasn't chaotic, it was choreography, and you, in your imagined position, are lying precisely where someone else once did generations ago, because it works. You reach down, press your palm to the soil, and feel not heat exactly, but presence. The land is doing its part. The temperature drops, but your bones don't notice. You're exactly where you should be. And just before you drift back into sleep, a soft voice seems to echo in the wind. Warmth lives where memory stays. You let that thought settle across your chest like another layer of fur. The dawn is still hours away, but already your inner sense of the night is shifting. You can feel the change in the air. A subtle drop, a moisture that wasn't there earlier, the beginning of real cold. It's the hour when even dogs tuck tighter into your back, when fire coals are their weakest, and when dreams turn foggy and vague. You curl up instinctively. But somewhere in the soft quiet of your mind, a thought stirs. What if you didn't have to endure this kind of cold at all? Because not all Aboriginal groups did. Many of them had another strategy, especially those in more mountainous or temperate regions, migration. You're picturing now the highlands of what is today southeastern Australia, places where winter can bring frost, where the wind slices instead of whispers. And in these regions, the simple truth was sometimes you just leave. You don't challenge the cold, you sidestep it entirely. Seasonal movement was embedded in many Aboriginal cultures, not as a disruption, but as a rhythm. You went where the food was yes, but also where the temperature made sense. Winter months were spent in lower valleys, near rivers that didn't freeze, or in forests where tree cover dulled the wind. When summer returned, so did the people heading back to the highlands for the bogong moth feasts or ceremonial gatherings under a kinder sun. You imagine this now, packing up camp as the nights get longer, cloaks rolled, embers carefully preserved in bark bowls, tools tied into bundles with reeds. You don't flee from the cold, you flow away from it. It's elegant, actually, and incredibly effective. Historians still debate the scale and exact patterns of these migrations. Some evidence suggests huge seasonal gatherings, while other accounts point to family-sized movements. But one thing is clear: warmth wasn't always something you had to build. Sometimes it was something you walked toward. There's a fringe theory, too, one that suggests certain dreaming tracks or song lines map not just spiritual geographies, but thermal ones. In other words, the sacred roots followed by generations may have been chosen in part because they aligned with the seasonal comfort of the land. Where the land was kind, the ancestors sang louder. And as you lie back in your shelter, still warm but knowing the coldest hours are ahead, you think about this option. The idea that movement itself is a kind of shelter. That keeping warm might mean not sitting still. In today's world, we heat the room. But back then, people heated their lives by moving through them. You can almost feel it now. Sunlight waiting on the horizon in a valley. One ridge over, or maybe a riverbed, 2 days walk away. You wouldn't need to carry much. Just the cloak on your back, the fire in your pouch, and the stories in your mouth. You sigh, shift your legs, and smile faintly. Even in your sleep, you're ready to follow the warmth. You don't need to conquer winter. You just need to respect it and walk where it doesn't go. You stir again, not from cold this time, but from sound. Gentle murmurs ripple through your imagined camp. Low voices, soft laughter, the shuffle of feet on packed dirt. It's not morning yet, but people are stirring. Not everyone's asleep and not everyone's meant to be. Because this hour, this in-between time of stars and firelight is when warmth becomes something shared, not just felt. You sit up slightly, your cloak falling from one shoulder, and glance around. There beside the fire are 3 figures, 2 wrapped in pelts, one cradling a child. No one speaking loudly, but there's a rhythm to their exchange. A cadence of comfort like breath passing from one to another. It dawns on you this isn't just sleeping. This is ceremony. In many Aboriginal cultures, night wasn't a pause, it was a space. A setting for stories, for quiet rituals, and for what might best be described as warmth rituals, deliberate ways of reconnecting through heat and closeness. Sleeping together was not merely practical, it was relational. It affirmed kin story and presence. Some families arranged themselves in careful patterns, elders at the edge of the shelter, children in the middle fire, between everyone. These configurations weren't random. They followed tradition, memory, and even cosmology. You didn't just fall asleep anywhere. You slept in relationship. Mainstream ethnographers describe these patterns with clinical labels, communal sleeping customs, nighttime arrangements, but that misses the tenderness of it. Imagine the curl of a grandmother's arm around her grandchild, the quiet murmur of an elder reminding a teenager to keep the embers alive. These were rituals even when they looked like rest. And here's a beautiful, quirky detail. In some regions, people sang warmth into being, not loudly, just under the breath. Low humming tones shared among small groups. Not lullabies exactly, but memory songs meant to soothe both body and spirit. One line from a Western desert tradition roughly translates to, "We are wrapped in the fire's song." That line stays with you now. Historians still argue whether these warmth rituals were explicitly taught or simply absorbed by proximity. Some elders say they just knew what to do because they watched, listened, curled up close, and learned with their skin. Others claim certain rituals were taught deliberately how to place the cloak, just so how to move coals with a stick, curved like a finger, how to fall asleep facing east, so your first breath in the morning matched the rising sun. You lie back again in your imagined place among them. The cloak is warm. The dog beside you exhales a deep sigh. Across the fire, someone hums, just barely loud enough to hear. It doesn't matter what language it is. You feel it in your ribs. You're not just warm now. You're woven into something. The night holds you not in silence, but in breath, song, skin, fire. You wonder drowsily how many centuries people have fallen asleep this way. Probably more than you can count. And as the stars shift slowly overhead, and the embers pulse gently with life, you let the thought linger. Maybe the best kind of warmth doesn't come from fire or fur or grease. Maybe it comes from being beside someone who's awake just long enough to notice you need pulling closer. The child stirs beside you now, a small presence wrapped in fur and dreams. Their breath is warm against your arm, and instinctively you curl around them, forming a little wall against the cold. You're not their parent, but that doesn't matter. Tonight, warmth is everyone's duty, especially when it comes to babies. You look down in your mind and see how the infant is bundled, not in anything store-bought or zippered, but in carefully folded layers of bark fur and soft plant fibers. This is a carry nest or a Coolaman cradle. It's been hand-shaped, softened with years of use, and it fits the child's body like a second womb. Aboriginal communities across Australia had countless ingenious methods for keeping infants warm at night, each one tailored to climate, region, and cultural tradition. The carry nest wasn't just for travel, it was a sleeping pod, lined with paper bark or emu feathers, and placed beside a fire or under a windbreak. It gave the child warmth from all directions. Not too hot, not too cold, just enough. You tuck the imagined child tighter under your cloak and think about how clever that design is. No buttons, no cords, just layers of the land shaped with love. But the real warmth comes from the body. In colder places, infants were held skin to skin against the mother or grandmother during sleep. The possum cloak wrapped around both bodies, the baby's heartbeat syncing with the adult's warmth, passing directly from person to person like a secret. Modern medicine now calls this kangaroo care. Aboriginal people have been doing it for tens of thousands of years. There's a fringe belief, too, still debated among anthropologists, that some fire pits were built with special hollows beside them for resting infant carriers, just far enough from the embers to avoid danger, but close enough to absorb steady heat. Heat by proximity. Safety by design. Historians still argue over how much of this practice was maternal versus communal. Some accounts describe grandmothers taking turns in the night walking with fussy babies until they settled their voices low and rhythm slow. Others suggest babies simply slept, where the warmth was beside cousins, between aunties wrapped in story and soot. You adjust your imagined body, cradling the child against your chest. Now the soft smell of bark and milk mixing with fire smoke. Their head is tucked under your chin. Their feet are curled like curled leaves. And you realize this isn't about one child. It's about continuity. To keep a baby warm is to keep a people warm. It's to pass the night forward. There's no anxiety here. No parenting apps or weighted sleep sacks. Just arm's breadth tradition. When the baby stirs again, you hum gently the same kind of hum you heard earlier. Not a song with words, just sound. Low, soothing, familiar. And just like that, the child goes still. A little ember wrapped in bark and memory. You settle again. The fire glows. The earth breathes under your hip. You sleep now not as one, but as part of something older and warmer. Somewhere near the edge of camp, a figure moves. You don't rise or even fully open your eyes. You just sense the shift, the rhythm of it. A woman, perhaps in her 40s, is tending the fire. Not just tossing wood on it, but caring for it. Stirring the coals, nudging a charred stick into place, coaxing a small blaze from the embers without making a sound. It's the middle of the night, and while most sleep, she does not. She's the fire bearer. In many Aboriginal cultures, fire wasn't just everyone's responsibility, it was often someone's. And in certain groups, that someone was typically a woman. You're watching her now from your cozy half-sleep. The way she moves isn't hurried but deliberate. She knows this fire. She carried it here. Fire bearers, often older women or experienced caregivers, had one of the most vital roles in the group. When camps moved, it was their job to bring the flame, not by sparking a new fire each time that's a modern fantasy, but by carrying the old one forward, in bark bowls, in hollowed out wood, or between slabs of stone coals, were carefully insulated and preserved during travel. It was a slow ritual, as essential as water or food. You imagine the journey now, this same woman walking across open country with smoke curling from a pouch slung low on her hip. Not bright flame, just a whisper of fire tucked into ashes, protected by fur or damp grass. She checks it often, she feeds it, she murmurs to it maybe. Historians still argue how widely this practice spread and whether it was formalized across language groups. Some oral histories emphasize the sacredness of the flame itself, that it was never allowed to die lest bad luck or spiritual imbalance follow. Others emphasize the skill required keeping coals alive in high wind, sudden rain, or long, dry journeys. Fire was carried like a child, always watched, never left alone. And here's a fringe tidbit that's lingered in a few regional traditions. Some women gave their fire a name. Not metaphorically. They spoke to it as kin. If it burned well, they thanked it. If it went out, they apologized. This wasn't animism, it was relationship. The fire kept you warm. It deserved your care. Now in your imagined scene, the fire bearer lifts her face to check the wind. Her face is lined not just with age, but with smoke memory, fine soot caught in the skin of someone who's walked beside fire every day of her life. She adds a sliver of bark fans, gently with a folded leaf. The glow deepens. She steps away. And just like that, the fire is alive again. Not roaring, not greedy, just strong. Enough to last until morning. You nestle back into your cloak and think about the warmth this woman has just made possible, not just for herself, but for everyone asleep around her. Children, elders, dogs, you. In this world, warmth doesn't come from pushing a button. It comes from care, from memory, from someone deciding every single night that the fire matters. And you sleep better knowing she's awake. You're dreaming again, or maybe just drifting. The fire pulses beside you, a warm heartbeat in the dark. But something odd itches at your shoulder. Not pain, just awareness, a line, a ridge. You reach up under your cloak half asleep and trace it with your fingers. It's an old scar. And suddenly you're wondering, was it always just for decoration? In some Aboriginal groups, especially in the north and central deserts, ceremonial scarification was practiced as part of initiation rites, identity marking, or spiritual connection. Raised scars were cut and rubbed with ash or ochre to form symmetrical patterns on the chest, shoulders, or back. Most people today see them as cultural symbols, but there's a fringe theory, quiet, unproven, intriguing, that suggests some scarification patterns may also have served a more surprising function, warmth retention. The idea is simple. Scar tissue being thicker and often ridged could have altered how the skin retained or radiated heat. Combine that with skin coated in fat and ash, and you've got a slightly different surface, less exposed, more textured, perhaps better insulated. It's speculative, of course. No mainstream study confirms this. But the fact that the scars were placed across areas most exposed to cold upper chest, shoulders, ribs, has made some researchers curious. Historians still argue about the why behind scarification. Was it purely spiritual? Social, artistic? Some believe it mapped dreaming stories, each ridge a path or ancestor. Others see it as social coding, indicating kinship, age, or region. But maybe it had bodily logic too. You press the imagined scar again. It doesn't hurt. It's old familiar. Maybe it's not even yours. Maybe you're remembering someone else's story through the cloak. Scarification, like so many traditions, wasn't one size fits all. Not all groups practiced it. For those who did, it was serious, a ritual carried out with stone blades or sharp bone, the wounds packed with ash and left to heal in the open air. Painful, yes, but in some stories the pain was the point. Endurance proved readiness, and afterward you weren't just older, you were changed. And perhaps lying under your cloak, you were a little warmer too. You stretch slightly, as if to feel the ridges across your imaginary skin. Not vanity, not spectacle, just history pressed into the body. A map of memory that might just maybe hold heat a little differently. It's a beautiful thought that something so painful to make could become something so comforting to keep. You roll onto your side again. The dog at your back shifts, lets out a sleepy grunt. The fire flickers and hisses, and your hand settles once more on your shoulder. You don't know if the scar was made for warmth, but tonight, under the stars and fur and smoke, it feels like it. The sky above you remains ink black, but there's a shift now, a different kind of presence creeping in. It's not colder or warmer, not louder or quieter. It's just heavier, like the night itself is leaning in to listen. And in the quiet, you start to hear it, a voice. Not a real voice, more like a memory of one. A whisper shared in a dreaming story. A tale passed down not with books or scrolls, but with breath, firelight, and shadows. Because in Aboriginal cultures, myths weren't just for children, they were guides for survival. And when it came to the cold, there were stories for that too. Tonight, someone beside the fire speaks. You can't make out every word, but the rhythm is familiar. The tone is slow, steady, gently teasing. A story about a spirit that brings winter, about a star that hides warmth in its pouch, about an ancestor who forgot to feed the fire and accidentally froze the wind. These myths were more than just entertainment. They were instructions, coded reminders about when to build shelters, how to care for the fire, which direction to sleep in, or when to migrate. The story might involve a lizard who stole the sun, but the lesson behind it: don't forget to relight the coals before dawn. Historians still argue over the literal versus metaphorical nature of dreaming stories. Were they based on real events filtered through generations of symbolism, or purely narrative tools for cultural cohesion? The academic debate continues, but one thing is certain: people remembered them. And when the wind blew hardest, the stories often answered first. You shift slightly and recall a fringe tale you once heard of a mountain spirit that tucked warmth under boulders, hiding it from careless travelers. Only those who listened to the rocks could find it. Maybe it's metaphor. Maybe it's weather science disguised in poetry. Either way, it makes you want to lean against a warm stone and whisper thank you. Beside you, the fire pit cracks again, as if responding. The storyteller's voice fades, replaced by a soft humming, the same tone as earlier. It wraps around the shelter like a blanket, low and constant, like a heartbeat underground. You think now about how myths don't just explain the cold, they soothe it. They offer context. They say, yes, the wind is biting tonight, but long ago it bit even harder, and someone like you made it through. And suddenly you realize stories are warmth. Not just because they pass the time or give the mind a place to wander, but because they remind you that you're not the first to face the night. You're part of a long, shivering, stubborn lineage of listeners and tellers and fire feeders. You breathe in deep. The air is smoky, earthy, and touched with story. You don't need to understand every line to feel its meaning settle into your chest. The myths hold you. The cold stays out. You shift slightly in your imagined sleep, only to realize the air on your skin feels different, not harsher, just stranger. It's warmer than it should be. The stars still hang in the sky, the fire still flickers low, but the cold hasn't crept in as expected. This place isn't supposed to be cozy. And yet it is. Because here's the twist you didn't see coming. Tropical Australia gets cold too. It seems counterintuitive. How could a region with mango trees, crocodiles, and wet season monsoons have chilly nights? But parts of northern Australia, especially during the dry season, can drop to surprisingly low temperatures. And when the humidity vanishes and the sky clears, heat escapes fast. The result? Campfires in Arnhem Land, fur cloaks in Kakadu, and yes, nighttime strategies that feel awfully familiar. Even in places where the daytime sun could bake mud into stone, Aboriginal peoples developed cold weather adaptations. They didn't dismiss the cold just because it didn't come with snow. They prepared for it like they always had, observing the land, adjusting their patterns, and building fire into the heart of their days and nights. Historians still argue how significant the temperature drops were, and whether tropical groups experienced cold stress on the same scale as those further south. But the evidence is clear. Even here, warmth mattered. Fire pits were dug, bark shelters were reinforced. Sleeping positions were adjusted based on wind direction. A chill is still a chill, even when it comes with a backdrop of palm trees and distant ocean breezes. One fringe detail worth noting: in some tropical regions, families positioned sleeping areas to take advantage of stone surfaces that absorbed heat during the day. By night, these surfaces radiated warmth back up into the body. Rocks weren't obstacles, they were radiators. You picture it now. You're no longer in the desert, but beside a wet season creek, dried now to cracked earth and silence. The trees are dense. The air smells of sap and distant charcoal. You lie on a raised earth platform, its edges lined with rocks. The fire burns low. The warmth isn't aggressive, it's ambient, patient, steady. You lie back and breathe it in. Even the tropics whisper of firelight. Even palm fronds remember how to rustle gently over windbreaks. Even here, where the daytime heat can fry an egg on the bark of a tree, the night still demands a cloak, a song, a careful ember. And maybe that's the real lesson. Warmth isn't about latitude. It's about attention. Whether in the red heart or the green coast, the cold comes for everyone eventually. And everywhere people have learned how to meet it, gently, wisely, together. You pull your imagined cloak closer again. Tropical or not, the night belongs to the fire. You're deeper into the night now, the kind of sleep where dreams blend with memory and warmth. Feels ancestral. But even in this imagined stillness, something shifts. The air tastes different, not colder but emptier. You reach out with your thoughts for the usual comforts. Fire, fur bark, dogs. And for a moment, they're not there. What you feel instead is the absence. Because not every night was like this. Not every family had fire. Not after they came. Colonial disruption didn't just bring fences and laws and foreign languages. It brought a sudden, violent silence to the knowledge of warmth. As settlers moved across the continent, building homesteads and claiming land, they also took something harder to map: the ability to keep warm in the old ways. You stir again in your imagined shelter, this time without comfort. You picture a family forced off ancestral camping grounds, no longer able to dig fire pits in familiar soil, no longer able to gather the right bark, hunt the right animals, or access the rivers they'd always moved with. What happens when you can't return to the winter valley? When the possums are gone, when firewood is fenced off for someone else's cattle, suddenly warmth isn't just about weather. It's about displacement. Historians still argue over the scale and speed of cultural loss caused by colonization. Some oral traditions held firm smuggled between missions and relearned in secret. Others fractured under the pressure of control. Mission schools that forbade language children taken from parents sleeping under tin roofs instead of stars. And here's the heartbreaking fringe detail. There are accounts of elders who would walk miles, sometimes barefoot, just to reach a tree or patch of soil they remembered, just to sit there and feel the warmth they once knew. Not from the sun, not from fire, from memory. You imagine them now crouched beneath a half-burned tree, rubbing ash into their hands, not for heat, but for continuity. Because what colonization stole was not only land, but the relationship to warmth itself. Even tools of survival became criminalized. Fires were restricted. Bark was property. Possum hunting was forbidden. Warmth, once communal and land-bound, became privatized. Now you had to ask for it or steal it or do without. And yet the knowledge didn't die. It went quiet. It hid in pockets in songs hummed while pretending to wash in scratches on a mission floor that mirrored old cloak patterns in the way an auntie always knew which way the wind would blow at sunset, even if she never spoke of it. You lie back in the shelter of your mind and feel the fire again. Not just the imagined coals, but the heat of resistance, the smolder of survival, the ember that refused to go out even when someone stomped on it. Because that's what Aboriginal warmth became during colonial times. A stubborn, glowing ember buried deep in memory, hidden but never dead. And tonight, it lives again in the cloak, in the ash, in the hum of the wind across the land, in the stories that sleep just beneath the skin. You breathe in, not smoke this time, but promise. You blink now slowly, softly, as if waking up from something older than sleep. The fire is steady again, the coals bright, and your imagined shelter hums with quiet life. But something else rises from the dark, this time not memory or myth, but movement. Around you, figures are gathering, not to sleep, but to make. Hands trace shapes in fur. Needles of bone and sinew flick through the air. Someone leans over a possum skin, smoothing it flat. You're watching a revival, not just of objects, but of knowledge once nearly lost. Because today, across Australia, Aboriginal communities are reclaiming warmth. The crafting of traditional cloaks, once banned or forgotten, has returned in full force. Artists, elders, and young people now sit in cultural centers and school halls, reviving the art of sewing pelts together, of inscribing designs, of whispering the old stories as they stitch. These aren't museum pieces. They're living garments worn at births, graduations, protests, and funerals, moments of presence and power. You run your fingers across your own imagined cloak again, only now it feels newer, not ancient, not inherited, made for you in this era by someone who decided that warmth didn't need permission to return. Mainstream historians have documented this resurgence with joy and surprise. The skill is often taught in workshops where elders guide younger generations, sometimes teaching stitching, sometimes teaching listening, because to make a cloak is to sit still, to be with others, to pass on heat in more than one form. Here's a heartwarming fringe fact. Some modern schools have begun incorporating cloak making into their curriculum, especially in areas where local Aboriginal nations are reclaiming language and ceremony. In these settings, warmth becomes a lesson, a source of pride, a point of connection, not just with the past, but with the continuation of culture. You picture one of these workshops now? A child with short braids and ink-stained hands, concentrating as she pushes a needle through fur. Her grandmother sits nearby, watching with a smile that's as much about memory as it is about stitching. They are not recreating the past. They are continuing it. The fire beside you now is brighter. Not the physical one, it hasn't moved, but the one in the story, in the community, in the thread. You lie back again, this time with the sense that your cloak wasn't handed down or imagined, it was gifted forward. Someone made it because they believed you'd need it. That warmth is still worth making. That comfort can be recovered, sewn together, patched where necessary. Historians may still argue about the past, but no one can deny the present Aboriginal warmth is not gone. It is being stitched back together, one fur, one fire, one story at a time. And in that story you sleep. The night has shifted again, not in temperature, but in tone. You can feel the hush now, a gentle stillness settling over everything. The fire is no longer a task to be tended. It's simply there. The dogs aren't circling or sighing. They're silent, folded into themselves, like furred commas. And even the stars seem slower. This is the final stretch, the hour before first light. And here in this deep silence, warmth isn't something done. It's something felt. You lie there in your imagined place and take stock. Your cloak, stitched by someone who remembered how, the dog curled against your knees, unmoving, the fire low and steady like a heartbeat, half buried in earth. Everything around you hums with presence. This is what it feels like to belong to the warmth, not to chase it, not to borrow it, but to be held by it. And then like a final closing breath, you remember something quiet. Warmth isn't just about temperature. It's about memory. The feel of bark under your spine, the scent of ash and grease, the hum of a song that never needed words. You can almost hear the ancestors now, not speaking, just existing, watching the same stars, curled under the same sky, passing the same knowledge night after night without pens or screens. Just warmth, just presence. Historians might still debate the details, when the cloaks were worn, how the fires were carried, who held the songs, but here in this moment, none of that matters, because the warmth you feel isn't imagined anymore. It's real, it's ancient, and it's yours. So you close your eyes again, not from exhaustion, but from fullness. The fire burns, the earth holds, the cloak wraps, and you warm, quiet, remembered fade into sleep. And now as the imagined fire burns low and the sky begins to pale behind your closed eyes, you let the weight of the night settle fully into your limbs. You don't need to move, you don't need to think. Every part of you is exactly where it should be, still soft and safe. The cold, which once loomed large, now feels far away. Not because it's gone, but because you've been held through it by fur, by flame, by stories that cradled you like a second skin. Every tradition you traveled through tonight, every cloak ember whisper wrapped you tighter into the rhythm of things. You breathe in now slowly, letting the last of the smoke-sweet air fill your chest. You can almost feel the earth rising just slightly to meet you, like a hill adjusting to your weight. There is no rush here, no sound, only breath, only warmth. If your thoughts wander now, let them. Let them drift toward bark shelters, to soft-eyed dogs, to fingers stitching sinew through fur. Let them travel gently like ash on the breeze, across seasons and song lines and stories older than frost. There is nothing left to do tonight. The fire has been fed. The coals are steady. The cloak is snug. And the warmth, well, it's everywhere now. Inside and out. So sleep finally fully. You are warm. You are remembered. You are home.